Cool. Thanks everyone for joining. Today is a talk about sleep and nutrition, and is it a one-way street, or what is the bidirectional relationship between the two? Now, there is no way we're going to cover everything to do with sleep and nutrition and their sort of interacting roles with each other. So, there'll probably be follow-up ones to this, but we'll get through as much of it as we can. It is a pretty big topic. I think what we're also going to start doing is every week now, I'm going to be sending, as a very light newsletter, a follow-up on a Friday related to the week's previous Q&A. So keep an eye out for that. If you're not a newsletter subscriber, certainly subscribe. And then once a month, I'll be sending out a big newsletter with app updates and podcasts and articles and books and things like that. So there's going to be a slight difference in the way we're approaching the newsletter from now on. But anyway, let's get into this. It's a pretty cool topic. I have written an article on this, which is on our website as well. If no one's read that, please go ahead and read that. You know who we are, so I think we can keep going. So today we're going to talk about sleep and nutrition and its impact on health, sleep and the impact on nutrition, nutrition and the impact on sleep, and then talk about a lot of the practical takeaways that you can take from this. During this, can you just remember to admit everyone as they're coming in? That's cool. Ooh, sorry, I don't know why I did that. Okay, so sleep and nutrition and the impact on health. So I will front this by saying that a lot of the data is correlation data, not necessarily causal data. What that means is that effectively it's not definitive whether sleep has these particular impacts on health. And certainly it is, oh, sorry, there's one more thing. You need to think about all of this with a pinch of salt per se. So sleep duration, certainly 7 to 9 hours with good quality has positive associations with health. And I know that seems really, really obvious. And if anyone's read Matthew Walker's book about sleep, then the take home at the very end of the book is sort of like, get 7 to 9 hours sleep and you'll certainly be in a better state of health, which I think sounds very obvious, but we'll go into that. So effectively somewhere between that 7 and 9 hours, and certainly not less than 6 hours, has associations with reduced risk of cardiovascular disease, diabetes, and cognitive decline. I guess the real question is too much sleep not necessarily good for you as well? Now, there are prospective studies and retrospective studies that look at sleep over 9 hours, and it has been quoted that up to a 33% risk of all-cause mortality. Now, I do have an asterisk there, and I'm going to allow Elizabeth to just describe the reason there's an asterisk there and why sometimes even when we look at meta-analysis or systematic reviews, that we need to just take into account some considerations.
Great. So one particular study that was looking at kind of the culmination of why are we saying that more than 9 hours is a bad thing? And when they stopped and looked at the respondents in this study, again, self-reported data, they were asking people, how much sleep are you getting? And they would say, oh, 9 hours, 10 hours, 11 hours. And what they were reporting was time, first of all, time in bed, not necessarily time in sleep. They were, they didn't differentiate. But then when they dug into that info deeper, they showed that the participants that were staying in bed longer were more likely to suffer from depression, anxiety, very high stress jobs. And so staying in bed longer was not necessarily because they were getting quality, impactful sleep. It was because they had these other health factors that were negative. And so we know higher stress, anxiety, depression can increase rates of mortality. And those people were also less likely to be engaging in physical activity and exercise, in eating a more healthful diet. So just looking off the top, that study of, oh yeah, people 9 to 10 plus hours have a higher mortality rate, but when you dig in, in these particular studies, there were other factors involved. I kind of like to use the analogy of like Cheerios. They advertise it reduces your risk of heart disease. And it's like, well, because they weren't eating the Big Mac for breakfast, they were having Cheerios instead. So you really have to be able to look into the data and not just take it at surface level, especially when it's self-reported.
And I think that's one of the really important points of what Elizabeth said there, is that time in bed does not represent time asleep. And so if anyone is tracking their sleep, and again, there are issues obviously with tracking sleep with some of the wearables because they're not necessarily clinical grade, but they will give you a picture of your sleep. You can certainly see if you've been in bed for 9 hours, your total sleep time might be estimated at least 8 hours, and you may actually be awake for an hour of that 9 hours. So if you are going to sleep and you go to bed at let's say 11 o'clock at night, and you're waking up at 6 o'clock at night, that's 7 hours of time in bed. You're not asleep for 7 hours. You're actually giving yourself the potential for less than 7 hours sleep from a starting place. So I think it's really important to work backwards from your wake time to the time you go to sleep, and probably factor in a buffer of at least an hour into there, an hour to an hour and a half on top. So that is something important. If we then keep going and look at sleep and look at nutrition and the impact on health, obviously, again, we all are beginning to see, again, the correlation and causal effects of overconsumption of calories in relation to obesity. And as this horrific stat says there, 2030, USA will have 1 in 2 adults, likely to have 1 in 2 adults with a BMI of over 30. Now, I know the population that we're talking to, which is endurance athletes, a lot of you sort of, I can see Elliot shaking his head. It is amazing. Like, it is amazing to think that a BMI, and these BMI scores and colors are changing. They're having to create new gradings of BMI and what is, being experienced in not just America, but also around the world. It is slightly scary. Now, again, some of this stuff that's really interesting is the overconsumption of calories increasing? And that's what's causing obesity to become even more of an epidemic? Or, as we're starting to see, the consumption of calories seems to be leveling out, actually. So there is an overconsumption of calories, but it's not becoming exponential. So now it's like, well, is it because of sugar? And actually, a lot of the data on sugar is showing that sugar consumption has actually dropped over the last 10 years. So what is driving this increased obesity crisis? And a lot of people are now pointing towards not probably just lack of exercise, but lack of movement. And I think something like the COVID pandemic has probably pushed people even further into a lack of activity, because now they're stuck at home, certainly working from home. So I think it is important we talk about steps, and, is 10,000 steps a magic number? No, but you certainly want to be as active as possible and keep up that activity in order to allow you to have a positive impact on health. The other thing I would say in terms of high consumption of fruit and vegetables is positively associated with, that should say, a reduced mortality, all-cause mortality. And again, this is correlation, not necessarily causation, but there's certainly, as I said to Elizabeth, no one's ever done as far as I'm aware, no one's ever completed a randomized controlled study on smoking, which shows that smoking will kill you. Yet when you see enough correlation around smoking and lung disease, obviously causal becomes a point. So what we're seeing is more and more data supporting the consumption of fruit and vegetable and the positive association with reduced mortality, and why that may occur we'll come into. Oh, sorry, I'm not sure why it's clicking like this. So let's talk about sleep and the impact on nutrition, because this is the area where most people, or most of the research, is actually focused, as opposed to the impact of nutrition on sleep. And there we have a koala, if no one knows what a koala is, native to Australia. Eats, sleeps and roots, that's it. Okay, so again, correlation, not necessarily causal, yet this all makes sense, okay? So excessively short or excessively long sleep will impact dietary patterns. So what does that mean? It means if you have short sleep, your likelihood is to increase caloric consumption, to have poorer habits, and lead ultimately to an increased risk of obesity. Okay. The reason short sleep, and then if we go into increased amounts of short sleep, you'll have an increased likelihood to snack, and you'll also have an increased number of meals per day. Okay, now this is not explained through physiological requirements. It's not that because you got less sleep, suddenly you're requiring more calories to maintain a human function. Okay, what it's put down to is like this hedonistic behavior. I think it's related to the prefrontal cortex and actually reduced appropriate decision making, a bit like how alcohol can inhibit the prefrontal cortex. So you get this increased hedonistic behavior saying, I want salty foods, I want sweet foods to make me feel better because I feel really terrible because I haven't had enough sleep. Okay, so I think that's really, really interesting in terms of that. Now, one really interesting fact with this, and again, you know, is it appropriate to this population in terms of triathletes and Ironman athletes? But this is where potentially something like time restricted feeding can be very effective for people who have short sleep, because if you've got a short sleep pattern and you know that you're going to have an increased likelihood of increasing calories and increasing snacking and increased number of meals at time, then if you apply a time restricted feeding window on that and stick to that window, it could be a way, and there is research to support this, that it could be a way of managing the effects of short sleep on the impact on nutrition. Now, I'm not saying to every triathlete out there that you want to be necessarily applying time restricted feeding to your life. However, if it meant shifting that time restricted feeding maybe to earlier in the day, i.e. you only eat between, let's say all your training's in the morning, and you say, right, I'm going to eat between 6:30 and 4 o'clock, potentially it could be one of those systems that could be very effective to get all your meals in without over consuming, but still meeting your total caloric requirement. So that's a really important point as well. In this population, we still want to push total calories and calories that are appropriate to your requirements, your daily requirements, but to not over consume those calories and potentially reduce the amount of snacking. And if alcohol is something that is an athlete struggles with, because the longer you're awake or the longer you have that feeding window, the more likely you are to drink alcohol in the evening, reducing that timing or bringing that feeding window a little bit earlier in the day is certainly going to reduce the chances that you're increasing your number of meals, you're increasing your snacking, and potentially increasing that ability to drink alcohol. That shorter window or earlier window could reduce all of those. Elizabeth, do you want to have, yeah.
So I was going to ask, so in your opinion, looking at this, let's say, because a lot of triathletes train twice a day, or will at the very least, they have to train after work. Is it worth it to, like, if they train from 6 to 7:30 and then have dinner, is it worth it to stay up later to get in like that extra protein feed if they're under, or is it better to go to sleep? Like in the long run, which is going to have the better impact on their performance? Go to bed without, meeting their targets for the day, or stay up an hour later, potentially, if they're not hungry, and try to have something.
Do you mean if they're training in the evening?
Yeah. Like if they just didn't happen to fit it in, and it's like, well, do I go to sleep? It's 9:30, or do I stay up until 11 and try to have a shake? I
just try and get it in around training and go to sleep. Yeah, I wouldn't be staying up.
Yeah. So I think the point, sleep is more important than.
Yeah, you might try and front load your day. So potentially just try and get the majority of your protein in the waking hours leading up to that. Maybe, yeah. And then potentially if you're really, if you're an older athlete, perhaps consumption of EAAs, something a little bit lighter, maybe not a heavy shake. Although, as we'll point out here, that something like dairy consumption prior to sleep could be beneficial because of some of the components of that dairy. So it could help in that sense as well. The other thing is about consider sleep timing. So waking up consistently, has been shown to, now what was this? It was about, I was listening to this the other day actually and reading about it, but certainly it's always talked about, being within 60 minutes of your sleep window. When researchers looked at this, it was looking at consistent feeding hours throughout the day and also having consistent wake times. And those individuals that had consistent wake times with a caloric deficit without a sleep deficit, then those individuals lost more fat mass and retained more muscle mass than someone who didn't have consistent wake time and also had deficient in sleep hours. So what it looks like is you want to at least have that 7 to 9 hour sleep pattern and also try and have a consistent wake pattern to improve the likelihood of having an improved body composition. Again, most of these are pretty small studies and there's probably a lot of confounding factors, but I think it makes sense, certainly from a tiredness perspective. I know if I can get my wake hour to be consistent, then it certainly seems to help.
And does that count on the weekends too?
Now, there was a study about this and it was more like catching up on the weekends, I think. And it showed that, I'm pretty sure it showed that if you just catch up on the hours on the weekend, that it still had a positive effect. And it didn't necessarily impact it that bad. We'll try and get hold of that study. Actually, I think it was a small scale Japanese study that did that. So again, it may not be necessarily appropriate to this. A lot of these studies on sleep as well, I will put a caveat that a lot of them are overweight or obese individuals with either poor sleep patterns already or obesity or being overweight, and not necessarily triathletes. Oop. Okay, so this is, I just need to shrink this. Oop. What's wrong?
It's jumped back the nutrition and sleep. It skipped one. There we go.
Sorry, which one are you on? There should be a picture.
Okay.
Is there no picture?
Yep, it fast forwarded through one. Sorry. Go ahead.
Is it on the picture now?
Yep, you're good.
Okay, cool. Okay, so what this is looking at, and it's probably, and we're going to talk a little bit more about this, but it's talking about the impact of diet and how diet effectively, when you break it down, things like tryptophan, 5-HTP, serotonin. So it's talking about the serotonin pathway and how factors within that pathway can have a positive effect on, say, melatonin production and ultimately impact good quality sleep. Now, this is purely from a nutrition perspective. There are a lot of different factors that can negatively impact sleep, and this is just one area of it. In terms of the poor quality sleep, and this is what we were talking about, or what I was talking about in terms of that hedonistic stimulus, is that if you get poor quality sleep moving from the bottom at 6 o'clock, moving around to 12 o'clock, is that you have a sensitivity to food reward, i.e. salty foods, sweet foods, and that can lead to unhealthy food choices, an increase in food intake through increase of poor quality, high caloric foods, or increased number of meals or snacks, which will ultimately increase energy intake and then result in poor diet quality and potentially increase in total calories and thus being in a caloric surplus and thus potentially gaining weight. Whereas the other way, from 12 o'clock to 6 o'clock, is showing good quality diet, how that can have a positive effect on sleep. So what you're starting to see is that sort of interrelationship between diet and sleep and diet. Okay, so let's talk about nutrition and its impact on sleep. So, again, correlation, not necessarily causal, yet it all makes sense, okay? I think, again, that point being, if you look at enough correlation, you start to see improvement, or you start to make sense of what we're seeing in real world. So, what we know is an increased consumption of fruit and veg is correlated to better sleep quality, okay? And that's a really important point to get across, that the sleep quality, i.e. Amount of deep sleep and REM sleep, can be improved through the increased consumption of fruit and veg. adherence and consistency to that type of consumption, i.e. months, years, shows less variability in duration and quality of that sleep. So it's not a case of just eating some fruit and some vegetables on an ad hoc basis. It's being consistent, much like what we talk about in the Fuelin program, of trying to get in a minimum of 6/5 of fruit and vegetables a day. So again, no different to training, no different to your just standard adherence to, hitting your protein target, your fat target, your carbohydrate target. Within that carbohydrate target, you need to be consistent with your consistent and adhering to that minimum of sort of, as it says down the bottom, 5. Oh, sorry, my fault. 5 to 7 serves of fruit and vegetable has a decreased likelihood of short or long duration sleep, and somewhere around 3 to 7 serves of fruit and vegetable will decrease the likelihood of poor quality sleep. So what is the magic number for fruit and veg? We don't really know. Certainly up to 7 serves of fruit and veg would make sense. Very hard to do. Somewhere as low as 3 serves of fruit and veg would be the minimal effective dose. Now we push 6 serves. I think if you could get in at least 4 serves of vegetables per day, if you're going to say, right, lunch and dinner, I'm making sure I have 2/5 at lunch, 2/5 at dinner, and then you got in a minimum of sort of 2 pieces of fruit per day, you're pretty much ticking off that box of that minimum effective dose. So a very important key takeaway there. I would aim for absolute minimum 2 pieces of fruit, 4 serves of vegetables. Anyone above that, really great, but sort of as a minimum effective dose, I would be pushing towards that. The Mediterranean diet, if you again, what is the Mediterranean diet? For me, the Mediterranean diet is just eating well. It's eating plenty of good quality proteins, lots of fish, lots of fruit, lots of vegetables, some grains, I guess some dairy thrown in there as well. It just makes sense. The diet, when that Mediterranean diet has been researched and studied and looking at, again, correlation between sleep issues in terms of quality, sleep issues such as sleep apnea, insomnia and whatnot, and duration of sleep, it's shown that it has a decreased incidence of those sleep issues and an improvement in duration of somewhere between 6 and 7 hours. An important factor here, which probably isn't applicable to a lot of our population, is that the Mediterranean diet, or these impacts that have been seen in these studies, don't seem to apply to obese populations. Now, that's probably because of coexisting other morbidities that unfortunately go hand in hand with obesity. The dietary inflammatory index is a system that looks at IL-6 and other pro-inflammatory markers, so cytokines, which are measured in the blood. What's been shown is that increased consumption of fruit and vegetables will reduce these pro-inflammatory markers. Okay, so often we'll get you tested for high sensitive CRP. It's one of the tests that we do recommend. It's a fairly a nondescript inflammatory marker. So it's not going to diagnose you with acute inflammation, but it will give you an indication if there is high amounts of inflammation in the body. So it's not a precise measurement, but it will give you a reflection of what's going in the body. I think if you marry up the high sensitive CRP with something like the Omega index, they often go as an inverse relationship. So often you'll see if high sensitive CRP is very high, you'll often see the Omega index being very, very low. Do you have anything you want to add to that?
Yes. And I was going to say, from like looking from the top level down, if let's say I'm working on getting my 8-ish hours of sleep, I can make that sleep better and potentially sleep longer if I make sure to get my fruit and veg during the day, if I eat a Mediterranean diet, if I am like if I'm doing it consistently. So it's not about potentially like a magic food for sleep, or here or there, like trying, you know, oh, I'm going to eat this one meal before my race so that I sleep really well. It's that daily, regular, consistent application of, I would say, smart eating habits.
Yeah, I mean, look, at the end of the day, like people could be looking at this and going, duh, like, yeah, I eat fruit and veg and like, okay, it's better for my health. It's like, yeah, like it is actually that simple. I guess like, and you know, the next slide is sort of interesting because it's like getting into the weeds about this. The reality is the science is really interesting, but you know, you come back to like the key takeaway. It's like increase 5 to 7 serves of fruit and veg because it could have a positive impact on sleep. It will most likely have a positive impact on health. And if you're a healthy, well-rested, not sleep-deprived athlete, you're probably going to train better and ultimately perform better. And I don't know how like to get that across any easier. Like it's like, it sounds stupid, but so many athletes just don't do it. So many athletes don't get 7 to 9 hours sleep. They don't eat 5 to 7 serves of fruit and veg. And so like, if you do the basics, it could have a huge impact on, again, ultimately health and ultimately performance. So yeah, and obviously we can discuss that afterwards. And if that doesn't make sense to anyone, please let me know. But it's it literally is that easy.
And in some of our talks, like when we did with the older athletes, potentially because it takes our bodies longer to recover, getting more sleep, like hitting that high end, kind of like hitting that protein is even more important. The older, like it's like the younger kids need the 10 hours, us older people need more. So it really has to be a priority as well as we age to be able to recover, perform, rebuild.
Yeah, I agree. So like, you know, the basics are there. I think, you know, we can agree. We all need sleep. We all need to eat fruit and veg. Let's get into a little bit of the cool science. So something that's often put forward is that you should eat like carbs at night can improve sleep. Now, again, is there a lot of robust science to support this? Probably not in terms of randomized controlled studies, but the mechanistic workings of it certainly makes sense. So tryptophan is an essential amino acid. So you want to be eating or thinking about consuming tryptophan containing foods. Where does tryptophan come from? It comes from animal products. So again, if you're a vegetarian, you can get it from dairy. If you're a vegan, it could be problematic. And if you're a vegan and suffer from sleep issues, this could be one of the reasons. Now, the really sad thing about this is that supplementing with tryptophan doesn't seem to have the same positive impact on sleep that eating tryptophan containing foods does. Now, that could be because maybe you're missing out on some of the other essential amino acids. And this is where maybe things like these, this is the whole argument against branched chain amino acids versus EAAs, and that nature intended things to be eaten or consumed as sort of all together as opposed to separate. So effectively tryptophan is involved in, if we go back to that picture, that serotonin pathway. And at the end product of that, what we call a KEGG pathway or the serotonin pathway is melatonin. Now, again, taking melatonin is something that we see an increased amount of recently, but taking melatonin may not actually be the best option for a lot of people with sleep issues. What is proposed as maybe a better way to think about this and why carbohydrates at night could be beneficial is that if you take carbohydrates, especially high glycemic carbohydrates, with tryptophan containing food, i.e. if you ate some rice with some chicken or fish, or maybe you had a yogurt afterwards with some banana on it, this will increase the availability of tryptophan. Now, the reason why it increases the availability of tryptophan, or why there's an issue potentially with tryptophan going across, is because tryptophan competes with what are called these LNAs, which are large neutral amino acids, which is effectively all the other amino acids in the body, essential amino acids. So they're competing to go across the blood-brain barrier to get into the brain. Now, if you provide an insulin response by eating a carbohydrate-containing food, then what happens to those other LNAs is that they then are shuttled towards that insulin response and pushed towards the muscle in response to trying to improve muscle protein synthesis. So what you get is a shuttling of those other LNAs away from the blood-brain barrier and increasing tryptophan to go across into the brain, which is really cool. In practice, what would that look like? It's as I described. Maybe it's, we think you need B vitamins, B5 and B6, and you need potentially magnesium. Magnesium bisglycinate in particular is one form of magnesium that has been shown to positively impact sleep. A food, could anyone think of either a supplement or a food that might contain carbohydrates, B5, B6 and magnesium?
Come on, guys.
I'll give away a 30-minute consultation. Either some type of product, some type of food, anything.
Oh my gosh.
I'll give you 5 seconds. Come on.
If not, I'm chiming in.
Someone must know. Come on. Have a stab. And you're not allowed to Google it, Emery. Anyway, a banana. A banana has B vitamins, it's got magnesium, and it's got carbohydrates. Something as simple as maybe a banana in the evening could be beneficial in terms of improving sleep. Now, I'm not saying there's any studies on in consuming bananas at night that could improve sleep, but it certainly could be some type of food type to give you that glycemic response, to give you that insulin response and help in terms of shuttling some of those tryptophan containing foods or tryptophan across the blood-brain barrier. So i.e. if you ate a good quality dinner, as I said, fish, chicken, beef, something like that, then it could help with that. One food that has been actually shown, and it was a very small study, but it was very interesting because it actually contains serotonin, is kiwi fruit. There was a really cool study with some Japanese. I think I've mentioned this before. They ate 2 kiwi fruit in the evenings, and it was in people that had adverse sleep patterns anyway. They already had poor sleep, and eating the 2 kiwi fruit was shown to improve sleep quality and sleep duration, I believe, in those Japanese subjects. So something simple like that could be done.
I feel obligated to chime in on but Scott, eating carbohydrates before bed just gets stored directly as fat, and it's going to make me fat. We've seen that 100 times. Can we?
Yeah, I think, well, to be honest, I think we do have to weigh up. Obviously, I'm not advocating everyone go out there and smash high glycemic carbs before bed, because there are potentially some there could be adverse health implications with that. If you have a blood glucose spike, and if you have some form of insulin resistance and you're doing that, then that could have a negative impact on cardiovascular health, lipid profile, so on. So I think it's time and place. I think doing it a few times and seeing if it does help, relative and taking into account the rest of an athlete's health profile. Certainly we're not saying, go and eat Cocoa Pops every evening to increase that blood sugar response. I think the other thing that's really interesting, though, is that your carbohydrate timing is going to impact. Like if you eat carbs in the evening, it will reduce the blood glucose response for the following feed. So in the morning. So if you have a higher carbohydrate feed in the evening, you will tend to have a lower response in the morning. So this is where the whole fasting thing sometimes gets a little bit confusing for people, because after a long extended fast, if your first meal after that fast contains a lot of carbohydrates, you will have an increased blood glucose response, and that could have negative impact in the long run. So this is probably a really nice, I think it's a really nice sort of infographic about foods that contain tryptophan. So as you see on the left, there are some vegetable sources of it. They're just not as good, but whole grains and legumes do carry it. And certainly, as I said, dairy products. But on the whole, it is mainly tryptophan is contained in animal products. So as we see there, the other thing that I said about tryptophan is that only a very small percentage goes across the blood-brain barrier. So maximizing the ability of that tryptophan through the carbohydrate, through using vitamin B6 and magnesium could be important along that kynurenine pathway. So some is lost through that pathway, and then the other 1 to 2% comes down into that serotonin pathway. So as it says there, the red dot around the LNAs, that's because we don't want competition there. We want to shuttle them off to the muscle. Carbohydrate, the insulin response is important, and potentially vitamin B6 is important then to increase the amount of serotonin production. We then need within the brain vitamin B5 and potentially endogenous magnesium, which you get, well, you're going to have endogenous magnesium from exogenous sources. Magnesium is one of those minerals at the moment which is fairly deplete due to farming methods. That's why we recommend that everyone gets red cell magnesium testing. If you are deplete in magnesium, again, there is some research to support the supplementation of magnesium, certainly magnesium bisglycinate to improve sleep, but magnesium supplementation, if you are deficient or insufficient, could also have positive impacts on cardiovascular markers such as lipid profile, and also improve blood glucose regulation. So that's important. Serotonin then becomes melatonin, and melatonin ultimately is the end product that could improve sleep. Okay, so I mentioned magnesium bisglycinate. If any of you have listened to Andrew Huberman on the Huberman podcast, he will talk, he has like this little sleep stack. Now, really interestingly, and I've actually reached out to him, I'm still waiting on a response, but he talks about magnesium threonate or theonate, as he says. I think it's threonate, but anyway, probably just a change the way in which we vocalize this. But regardless, I have not been able to find any scientific research to support magnesium threonate as supporting improvements in sleep. There's plenty of evidence to support its use for improvements in cognition and brain function, which I guess could be correlated to improve sleep. But as far as I'm aware, there is no studies, and I'm happy for anyone to send them to me, supporting the ingestion of magnesium threonate to improve sleep. However, he does talk about this glycinate dehydrate, or it's also called bisglycinate, and it actually is shown to improve sleep quality. So it's linked to improvement in deep sleep. It's linked to improvements in REM. And as it says there, somewhere between 10 and 30%, which is a very wide sort of ranging response. And it's probably that response in terms of improvement to sleep performance is related to how bad your sleep is before taking it. There's two other forms in there. There's an amino acid chelate, and as it says there, it helps in terms of improving deeper absorption. That's more for muscle. And then there's a citrate, which slows down absorption because amino acid chelate and dehydrate, or the bisglycinate, has a very fast absorption rate. So in terms of total amounts of magnesium, one scoop of this product will give you around 310 milligrams. Most of the research I've read is that you probably need a total amount of around 400 to 450 or 400 to 500 milligrams of total elemental magnesium to make a difference. So I tend to take 1.5 scoops of this. I can tell you now that when I do take, I sleep very well anyway, but if I do take this, then I do see improvements in my REM sleep if I am tracking with my oura. I think one of the other really nice things about this product is that it actually tastes really good, because magnesium generally tastes really, really bad. So this product, the way I habit stack this is before I brush my teeth in the evening, I have a shot of this. I have 1.5 scoops of this. I wash it down. I have the berry flavor, and then I brush my teeth. And I tend to do that about 60 minutes before going to sleep. This product is actually becoming available on the feed, and you will be able to purchase that directly through the feed or through the Fuelin app via the feed, whichever really floats your boat. But it is a very good product. And as I said, if you are insufficient or deficient in magnesium, I think from a health perspective, I would recommend this product. And secondly, if you do struggle with sleep, it's worth giving it a go. Now, again, it's not the thing that's going to, like, suddenly transform all your sleep, because as it says here, sleep is also affected by other means. Do you want to run through this?
Yeah. But before, on the supplement one, I just want to help clarify for people. Is it dangerous to go over the 400-ish to 500? Like, what if they have some from their food and they have some in a supplement?
I don't know about any toxicity issues with magnesium. I think what you'll find is you'll probably get diarrhea.
Thank you. That's should they start with 1 scoop and then increase just at the potential of causing GI issues?
Look, I think if you're under 60 kilos, then probably, go again, because I think this is the thing, isn't it? You look at all these studies and they give this one dosage of, a supplement. It's like whey protein initially was like 20 grams for everyone. That's like, well, what if you're a 110 kilo athlete? And it's like, well, maybe you need double that amount than the 50 kilo athlete. So I think, look, roughly speaking, if you're probably a 60 kilo athlete, start with 1 scoop. If you're over 60 kilos, maybe 1.5 scoops. If you're over 100 kilos, maybe 2 scoops. But I don't think there's any toxicity. Again, if anyone knows anything different to that, tell me. If you've got any concerns, speak to your doctor. But certainly, I think the biggest side effect is going to be loose stomach.
And it's not a sleep medicine, so they don't have to worry about like asleep, like the worry of driving or something like that. Like, you take it at night specifically because it calms and starts that process, and it's part of your routine, like your habit stacking that you said. But if they took it at 6 p.m., it's not going to all of a sudden make them go to sleep at 7:30.
No, not that I'm aware of. I think taking it somewhere between 1 and 2 hours before bed would make sense.
A lot of times when people hear sleep, they think like, oh, it's a sleep, a NyQuil equivalent or something, and it's not. Like, you're safe to take it.
You're not gonna fall asleep at your watching. Well, I fall asleep watching TV all the time, but I think it's got to be built into your sleep hygiene. And I know we haven't touched on sleep hygiene, but again, there's some really interesting studies on improvement of body composition through improving sleep hygiene. And I think we've got to look at this as a big picture, don't we? It's like, how does nutrition impact sleep? How does sleep impact nutrition? How does exercise impact nutrition? How does exercise impact sleep? What can you do to improve sleep? So things like bright light, noxious stress, screen time, bright light, it's all very similar, isn't it?
Yep.
Reducing even TV time, to probably trying to switch off the TV. If you are a bad sleeper, again, like, I can watch TV, put my head on a pillow and fall asleep within 3 minutes. Like, I don't have a problem with sleeping. But if you're someone who struggles with sleep, then go through systematically, like, improving the simple steps. So improving your sleep hygiene. So removing TVs from your room. Don't have your mobile phone in your room. Stop reading your mobile phone 2 hours before you sleep. Read a book before sleep, as opposed to watching TV or looking at your mobile phone. What else? Exercise timing. Probably exercising at least 3 to 4 hours before sleep would make sense. If you have a sensitivity to caffeine, consider the half-life of it. Your genetic makeup, although again, like, some of the genetic stuff is a little bit wary. There's a lot of variability in the research around this, but if you are a slow metabolizer, then potentially consider, consuming caffeine no later than 12 o'clock in the afternoon. And certainly, I think for most people, consuming caffeine, stopping it at around 12 or 1 o'clock makes sense. Certainly 8 hours before getting into bed would make sense. Melatonin, it's not advised to take melatonin unless you have jet lag, or you've induced social jet lag, i.e. probably partying like it's 1999 on New Year's Eve, and potentially using it the following day to induce sleep. But you do not want to be relying on melatonin daily. And then the last thing would be dairy. Dairy can have a positive impact, as described through the tryptophan and the serotonin pathway. And then you've got alcohol, which, again, New Year's Eve's just been, everyone's in January, you know, are you drinking? Do you suffer from poor sleep? Do you suffer from poor eating patterns? Is alcohol responsible for the poor sleep? Is alcohol potentially sabotaging your diet? Because when you drink alcohol, you inhibit that prefrontal cortex. Decision-making goes out the window, and that burger and the pizza and the extra craft beer all sounds pretty good. And so you get stuck into that. So, as I will say, alcohol has had the single biggest impact on all my data displayed by Oura. And I'm not saying Oura is like this clinically, you know, sophisticated measuring system, but certainly in terms of subjectively and being as objective as possible, alcohol without doubt has had that biggest impact, or removal of alcohol. So this is a screenshot. And if anyone does have an Oura, but they don't use that link in the bottom right-hand corner, if you don't use the website, I would highly recommend using the website over the app, because it gives you much cooler sort of data insights if you're a bit nerdy and you look at this. So what this is looking at is my lowest heart rate versus my HRV. Heart rate is the black line, the blue line is my HRV. The two arrows down the, or three arrows down the bottom, the two blue, the one yellow. The blue is when I stopped drinking for a period of time. So the first time in January 2022 was for 2 months. And that was, so it started on February the 1st and went through to April or the end of March. And you can see a very distinct increase in my HRV relative to December, which was probably not a good month because of Christmas. And then you can see the very distinct drop again when alcohol resumed. Now, you can also see with heart rate, the fairly rapid decline in resting heart rate. Now, resting heart rate is one of those measures which is best used to describe overall health. It is a marker, the lower the heart rate, generally accepted that the healthier the individual. So then you come through to July, and you can again see I then had effectively 3 months of no drinking and pretty much have continued that no drinking throughout. And so whilst I have probably had a couple of days of enjoying alcohol with friends, I have severely cut back on alcohol. And as a result, what I'm seeing is a bit more of continuation of that resting heart rate, dropping down to around 38. That's as an average. Oh, sorry, lowest average. My heart rate more recently has been getting down to sort of 33, 34, which is very interesting. And then my peak or my average HRV is staying much higher. Now, the yellow dot, the yellow arrow, I was trying to work out why it dropped. And that's when I started triathlon training. So I started doing a lot more cardiovascular training at this point in time. And I think it's really important if people are using HRV, because what it showed was that I was overreaching. I was doing a lot of training, a lot of running, you know, probably not relative to any of you, but I was doing about 50 Ks of running a week. I was trying to get in the pool twice a week. I was cycling 3 times a week, and I was lifting weights twice a week. So I was doing a lot of training. And as a result, my HRV started to drop. But then my body started to respond to that and actually bounce back over the last 2 months and has stayed fairly steady despite the load being the same. So I thought it was a very interesting sort of observation from an HRV perspective, but certainly, so how training can impact HRV, but also certainly alcohol. Then we go into sleep. So how does my HRV relate to sleep? So again, what this shows is a negative correlation in that effectively what we were seeing is, and this may be explained by my wake up time and having less duration in sleep, but we were seeing an increase, a slight increase in my HRV was related to a slight reduction in my REM sleep. And I think this is because I actually started waking up earlier, and majority of REM sleep is actually associated with the circadian rhythm, somewhere between, I think you get majority of your REM sleep between 6 o'clock and 7 o'clock in the morning. So I started waking up a little bit earlier. And that's why you can see in November that we started to see changes there. And then in terms of deep sleep, it was the reverse. So we started to see with alcohol consumption here that my deep sleep, so earlier sleep started to improve. And that correlated really well to my HRV. Improvements in my HRV saw an improvement in deep sleep, which again, I thought was interesting. And actually the training didn't seem to have too much of an impact on that. And then finally, HRV and total sleep. Obviously in January, I'm getting a little bit more sleep, but it did, I tended to push around my sleep a bit. My wake up timing sort of sits between an hour and a half of sleep, but I certainly don't have too many issues with that. So there was a fairly weak negative correlation. So i.e. as HRV went up, did we see a slight drop in total sleep? A little bit in that relationship. And that was probably just because I wasn't drinking alcohol. I could wake up earlier in the morning and do more training. Okay, so key takeaways for me and the team at Fuelin is, from a nutrition perspective, fruit and veg, 5 to 7 serves a day. It's just what you do, okay? It's just your program. You just do it. You know that it's going to improve health. You know that it's probably going to improve sleep, and ultimately it's probably going to improve performance. Dairy, if your dietary preference allows you to have dairy, then certainly consuming some dairy could impact positively your sleep patterns because of tryptophan. B6, B9, potentially get tested from your bloods. If you are B12 deficient, then probably taking a B complex would make sense. Certainly eating foods that contain B6, B9, things like your leafy greens, bananas, grains, they're all going to help contain those B6, those B vitamins, and obviously meat products are going to contain B12. Magnesium is found in a lot of fruit and veg, but as I said, farming methods have resulted in depletion in magnesium levels in soil. So if you are magnesium insufficient or deficient in your red cell magnesium, then supplementing with magnesium in general could be beneficial from a health perspective, cardiovascular, but also insulin control, blood glucose control. Magnesium bisglycinate in particular, if you've got sleep issues, could be beneficial to improving sleep. And as we said, carbohydrates could positively impact sleep. Alcohol, I think as I outlined in that, just think about alcohol. There is evidence to show that one drink will not necessarily negatively impact sleep duration and sleep quality. I will say, if I have had one drink, anecdotally, I have noticed that I don't tend to see too much difference in my sleep data. So if you do want to have a drink, maybe have one, keep it to one. Abstinence or removal, avoidance is probably easier than, removal of alcohol from the fridge or from the wine store at home, things like that is much easier than resistance. Not always possible, but certainly from a habit forming perspective, it's much easier to do that. If you do, one trick that I've used is replacing a bad habit with another. So I've replaced with non-alcoholic beers. I just like having a beer. I like the taste of it, so I will tend to drink non-alcoholic beers, and that's been a very effective habit formation. And the last point about alcohol dehydrogenase, or ADH. ADH is not made very well by women, no matter what your age, which is why women tend to struggle with alcohol more than men. ADH production is reduced as we get older. So what you will see is one day you'll wake up and you'll have a singing hangover, and you never used to get them. And then you're like, what is this? And it's a hangover. And it's probably because you've got a little bit older and you're not producing enough ADH. So that's on that. And then from a health perspective, I think, look, minimum 7 hours sleep, and that's hours of sleep, not time in bed. Maybe 9 is the upper ceiling, but I think, as Elizabeth pointed out, over 9 hours. If you get 9 to 10 hours and you feel great, and glucose control improves, lipid starts improving, your choice of meals improves, and you're exercising better, go for 10. I think it's working out where you sit in that. Maybe if you're lying in bed, and getting 13, 14, 15 hours of sleep, there could be other factors involved there. We've described how it relates to all-cause mortality. The quality of sleep versus the quantity of sleep, you can positively impact the quality of your sleep by eating more fruit and vegetable, and certainly impact the duration of that sleep as well. And then this is just a quote I took from actually the article I wrote. And I think just take a moment to read through it, because I think it is really important for people to sort of, get their head around, because I'll shut up and you can just read it. And, I think it really is just being more mindful, more consistent, and adhering to a eating pattern that is probably going to have the biggest impact on, not just sleep, but overall health and ultimately your performance. So, think about how all this rolls in together and how it's all interlinked.
It feels like it's a very symbiotic relationship.
Yeah, but it is, isn't it? I think everyone they separate out all these things, and you hear experts talking about sleep, and then you'll hear an expert talking about exercise, and then an expert talking about strength conditioning, and then an expert talking about cardiovascular training, and they're all related and they're all linked together. And I know a lot of you are starting to see this and see that impact, and that the relationship between better food and better health, and better food and better performance, and better food, better sleep, and better sleep, better health, better sleep, better performance. But I think once it finally clicks in your head that that's how it all relates, then it's actually a pretty simple process. And yes, there's all this really cool science and research around it, and physiology and whatnot. But if you break it down, it's really not that hard. And then ultimately, what is Fuelin doing? It's just giving you that system to hopefully encourage you to eat the right amounts of food, the correct types of food, and do them at the right time. And I think if you can just see it in that way, it then becomes a very powerful, system for you to follow and hopefully maximize, as we say, health and performance. Elliot, what was your point about walking around Costco and Walmart?
Oh, that was just the 1 and 2 people with a BMI over 30.
Yeah, it's
bad.
I can't say. It's interesting again looking at the, when you walk into supermarkets in Australia, and I don't know what it's like. I can't remember what it's like in America, but certainly in Australia, you walk in and the first thing you hit is fruit and vegetables, and they're all in a section, and then you sort of have to work your way through the aisles of all the junk food and all that. It might be a different setup over there, but certainly what I would encourage everyone to do is head straight for the fruit and veg section as your first line of shopping, and stay on the periphery. Don't go into the aisles if you really want to help yourself from a habit formation. Easier said than done sometimes. I know we're on an hour, and apologies for just talking so much. It's a super interesting topic, and does anyone have any questions sort of offhand about what we discussed? No questions?
While people are thinking of some, Scott, do you think, I really thought the alcohol component was interesting, and using that metric. Can one change really impact that much, whether it's someone getting their fruit and veg or their alcohol? It feels like at the end of the day, it doesn't have to be all the things. You can pick one thing or one area and start with that and really see an impact on your sleep and overall health.
Well, I think again, I'm N equals 1, but the only thing I did back in, February was I removed alcohol from my diet, and it had a profound impact on, not just objectively from a heart rate HRV perspective. HRV, I don't necessarily notice. Honestly, I don't notice the difference within myself, but certainly as I think just subjectively, I felt so much better. And then, again, come October, November, December, it's just a noticeable shift in removing alcohol from it. And, it's, I think maybe it's because it was such a big habit to remove. And it's not saying that I was drinking heaps. It was just that it was probably consistent, like having a glass of wine or having 2 glasses of wine every night. And I'm sure like a lot of people can relate to this in terms of COVID and what lockdown did. It was like, oh, is it 5 o'clock yet? It's like you're stuck in the house and you sort of have a glass of wine. And I'm probably not as good as my partner, Mel, and she can have 1 glass of wine, but I'll always have 2 glasses of wine. And, and again, if you listened, and I think I did share that episode by Huberman about alcohol, it is a very powerful podcast episode on alcohol and its effect on the body. And certainly the effects are not positive. And it really resonated with me, maybe because of, again, history of head trauma from rugby and stuff like that. But I think I think it's all relative to the individual athlete. Like if you're sitting listening to this and you go, you know what, I probably do drink a little bit too much. You know what, I suck at waking up in the morning. You know what, my sleep really is not that great. You know what, every time I drink, I tend to eat a lot of chocolate and a heap of other crap. Maybe removing that one habit or replacing that one habit could have gigantic impact on the rest of, your health and your performance. So I'm not saying alcohol is going to do that, but I certainly think if you go through it systematically and think about, like, is it one of those things, one of the habits that is not necessarily pushing me towards the person I want to be or the athlete I want to be, then I would certainly think about starting there.
And I think now is a great time to do it. It's still that month of January where we're all kind of, pumped up about the new year. And we didn't talk about it as much, but I know one thing that changed my sleep significantly was proper fueling. Like my days of under fueling and going to bed starving, my sleep, I didn't have an Oura ring back then, but I guarantee it was zero, absolutely zero sleep quality whatsoever. And so I think that one habit for me personally, not only was I not having the night sweats and like lying in bed starving, the sleep that I actually did get was restful. My body was regenerating. So I think it doesn't have to be giving something up. It can be incorporating proper nutrition and proper fueling on a consistent basis that can have the impact as well.
Yeah, and we didn't talk about like the architecture of sleep, like the different phases, deep sleep and REM, but my understanding is deep sleep is where you get a lot of that physical restoration of the body. So if you are tracking sleep and you're seeing minimal deep sleep, then you probably want to be thinking about, okay, how can we maximize that deep sleep component? And that could be something as simple as fueling appropriately. And making sure that you're getting that in, reducing caffeine, reducing alcohol, getting to time on bed, improving your sleep hygiene, removing bright screens and things like that, and allowing that deep sleep, which is the first, well, it's not the first cycle of sleep, but I think it's the second or third. But what you see in terms of what you'll see in your data, whether it's Whoop or Oura, is that you should hopefully see some improvements in that deep sleep quality and duration.
And that deep sleep makes up, so that's like the third stage. It makes up about 20% of your total sleep. It should. And most people they have it at like 5 to 7%. So there's a big room for improvement. That is the part that's critical for like the memory of your immune system. So it's important not just for overall health and performance regeneration, but it's also a key component for maintaining a proper immune system. I think they did some studies about people that got vaccines. If they had better deep sleep afterwards, their body produced more antibodies to fight that. So it's a very important component of sleep, for sure.
Nighttime protein with added tryptophan. So you're talking about like a casein, Anne-Marie, like a slow digesting protein?
I have a protein powder and it just says on the packet that it's got added tryptophan, so I'm not too sure what that would be. I could run up and have a look.
Yeah, I mean, again, like supplementation with tryptophan hasn't been found to be effective. Casein, as a slow digesting protein, will contain adequate amounts of tryptophan in it. So again, look, is a slow digesting protein worthwhile taking? Again, context, if you're an older athlete, if you're failing to meet your total protein intake, if you're training later in the day or in the evening, and potentially if you're struggling with sleep, yeah, it'd be worth considering taking. Having a casein with added tryptophan in it, I don't know. I haven't seen it. It may help. I would say for you, just if you are taking that, I imagine it's a milk protein or a milk protein blend. So it'll generally be like a milk protein with a concentrate, something like that. Then yeah, if it helps. And I would just say probably take it, at least 30 minutes before bed. It just depends on how you go to sleep with a full stomach. Like I know Bob's on this call, and he sometimes wakes up starving in the middle of the night. And so one thing we have talked about is taking like a casein drink before bed, to try and improve that feeling of satiation. And that's just from a satiation standpoint, but I also know that it will improve net protein balance, which could be positive, based on age and based on training volume. And then could it help his sleep? Potentially as well. So, I think all these things, again, they're multifactorial, and you don't always want to be thinking. I think so many people think from a myocentric or like a muscle perspective. Everyone just goes, oh, well, that's what it does. And it's like, but what about the rest of the body, and what about the rest of the bodily systems? What is the impact on that? And so one thing will often touch on other systems as it goes. Do you know what brand it is?
It's Infinite. Actually, I'll run up and get it while you finish up, and I'll let you know what's in it.
Yeah, it'd be good. Any other questions at this point? Does everyone sleep really well, by the way? Oh, does everyone track their sleep?
I'd love to hear if you guys sleep well, and or if you've done something that you think changed or impacted your sleep in a positive way.
Karen, you're shaking your head.
I don't sleep great. I am sleeping better than I did, say, 5 years ago. Probably because I'm not chronically underfueling, and having night sweats is part of it. And I take magnesium supplement before bed. I don't know.
Which one?
It's just a caplet. The magnesium, whatever the one that you specified is, the bisglycinate.
It is bisglycinate?
Yeah. Yeah.
And how much do you take of that?
I don't know. I'd have to look at the container. I know it was recommended to me a couple of years ago, and they said 3 caplets, and 3 caplets was too many.
In what sense? It made you like weird dreams or
diarrhea? Like, out of bed and into the bathroom before I had my morning coffee reliably. So yeah, I had to cut back to find the sweet spot.
Good for races then. Perfect. Clear you out before the morning. And are you still taking the magnesium? You still take 1 cap?
Yeah, I do.
And it's interesting that you say, okay, so you reached for a supplement, but have you, like, in terms of like fruit and vegetable consumption, how would you say your fruit and veggie consumption is?
Pretty good. I mean, in the last year, I stopped eating vegan, but I was plant-based for 7.5 years. So I ate a lot of fruits and vegetables.
Okay, you probably ate a lot then. Yeah. You're probably the rare one. What about like sleep hygiene?
Yeah, so I've worked on that. Yeah, limiting screen time. I'm not super good at that. It requires discipline. And I have to say, I have noticed the negative impact on my sleep that alcohol has, but I don't want to believe that that's actually
I think I resisted that for a long time, and then having a newborn baby just put me over the edge. I was like, I can't do this anymore. So.
Yeah, and I've been, because I'm not prepared to give it up completely, creating some like artificial rules for myself around when sleep matters more. So not the day before my hardest bike workout and never the day of my longest training day, because it's more important that I get good sleep that night. So
you're building in, it's small wins. Like we did Elizabeth did a great presentation to the feed the other day, and we're talking about habit formation. It was, small wins count. You take those small ones and maybe you build on that. And I think the substitution of these non-alcoholic, non-alcoholic wine is terrible. I wouldn't ever suggest anyone goes and does that, because grape juice, expensive grape juice, but certainly there are some decent non-alcoholic Proseccos. So if you like Aperol Spritz, like there are some really good non-alcoholic Aperols now. And there's a brand called Lyre, Lyre, which does non-alcoholic spirits. And they do this awesome Amalfi Spritz. It just tastes like Aperol, like literally you can't tell the difference. And in summer here, we've been having that and it's really good. It just tastes like an Aperol, but no alcohol. So it's good. And as I said, non-alcoholic beers, I think you've got Athletic Brewing over there in the US. There's not as many. There's like millions of them here in Australia now. It's really taken off, the non-alcoholic beer sort of
I'm in
consumption.
Canada, so we've probably got even less up here.
Yeah. So
I'll just have to be drinking wine.
If we want to set up a Fuelin non-alcoholic beer company, I'm all for it. So
Scott, I'm glad you mentioned the wines, because either Google was listening or like they know I'm not drinking right now or something, because I've seen all these ads lately for non-alcoholic wines and I thought, I'll give them a try. They're awful,
horrible.
Really?
Look, I mean, they're horrible. I'm not even going to try and defend them. They just taste terrible.
And thank you. I will not waste my money.
Yeah. So no, look, Karen, I think, you're a really good example of like that real world, like troubleshoot and work your way through it. And it's probably not all going to happen at once. It takes time. You've got to be patient. It's much like diet. You've got to be patient. It's all about adherence and consistency. And I cannot stress that enough with anything. Like I'm sure first time, like getting on a bike and riding for an hour, I don't know how you go. I've never ridden for more than an hour and a half and I still don't know how you do it. Like I just can't sit on a bike for that long. I get so sore.
You got the wrong saddle.
Yeah, probably, but like, it's just, but I know that I've got to just consistently do it to get used to it. And so it's just getting back on the horse and doing it again and again and again until it gets easier and easier. And it's no different with nutrition. I was talking to some friends the other day, and I know we've gone over time, but feel free to drop off. But it's like I don't look at cooking as being a hassle. Like I don't look at making a salad or cooking vegetables or eating vegetables or salad as like something that is hard work. But I think what I hear consistently from people who struggle with diets and struggle with eating, especially potentially with this program, is like it's viewed in a negative light. And that process is like, I've got to cook. I've got to eat salad. I've got to eat vegetables. Whereas like my approach to that is like, excellent. I get to eat salad. I get to eat vegetables. So there is a little bit of NLP and then in neural linguistic programming, like that mindful approach to, you get to do something as opposed to you have to do something. It can have a huge spin on things. Like, so I always think like one of my best friends is a quadriplegic. He broke his neck 10 years ago. And, like if you ever think like, I have to go for a run. I've got to go for a run. I've got to go for a swim. Like think about someone in their case where, you're lucky enough, you get to go for that run or you get to go for that swim. And there's lots of people who don't get to eat quality food as well in this world because they can't afford it. So, or they don't have access to it. So I think if you do have the opportunity to eat fruit and vegetables, then you should wholeheartedly grab it with two hands and get stuck in. Anyway, that's my
excellent.
My mindful
end there, man. That's a gem.
What have we got? I tried a few North American wines in non-alcoholic wines in Sydney while I was there over the holidays. Didn't know I had to go to a bottle shop to get the real deal. Okay. If you remember, Marta, what they were, you probably, we don't sell alcohol in our supermarkets. It's pretty controlled. If you remember what they were, feel free to share them on the social media, on the Facebook group as well. And the Athletic Brewing, we get them here in Australia, and they're pretty good. I do have a favorite brand called Tinnies, but I think it's Australian, and it's not. I don't think it's distributed anywhere else in the world. So
that could be your side hustle. You
could
ship it to America for those other athletes.
It's Tindal's Tinnies. So
there you can see, it's perfect. Like set up an Etsy shop as like the front, and then just.
That's good. So look, I know we've gone over time. Thank you everyone for joining in. I think it's such a fascinating topic, and obviously at the end, let us know what you think of the talk, and if there's follow-ups to this that you would like to learn more about. I would direct you to, there's a podcast on Sigma. Hold on, I'll put it in the chat now, just while
Sigma Nutrition.
Yeah, you know, gonna keep
and Scott's article. Read that from as well.
Yeah, you can read that if you want to. Read this one, it's pretty good. Listen to this one. Sigma Radio, really interesting. Pretty much it was Elizabeth sent it to me after I put the presentation together to have a listen to, and we're pretty on point with everything. Not all of it's fully supported, but as I said, there's probably more research to come, and depends on which research you read. So and then last thing, this nighttime repair, just looking at it, does it have the ingredients? Oh, that no. Does it have the NIP? No, it doesn't. It doesn't have what's in it, which is a concern. Yeah, I don't know, Anne-Marie. It's hard to say.
On the back, it says it's.
Oh, there we go. That's
interesting. The first ingredient is maltodextrin.
Yeah,
and
that's sugar.
WPI, casein protein, and the tryptophan is 2,000 mgs. It says. Actually, there's not much protein.
Yeah,
Sorry.
it's pretty low protein content.
Yeah.
So now what you've got here is certainly a high glycemic carbohydrate with maltodextrin and dextrose. So you're ingesting. Yeah, I'd say there's probably more sugar than that. Infinite's, I won't say they're a terrible brand, but they're probably not one that I would trust completely. They're 25 grams of potentially sugar in that, and certainly high glycemic sugars, which, again, as we said, will promote that. It's a low protein intake, so it's certainly not going to help in terms of net protein balance, but because it's got the tryptophan in it, which again is a supplemental form of tryptophan, it'd be interesting to see what the total amount of tryptophan in that product is, but they haven't broken that down. You'd probably want to add another scoop of whey protein to that. But again, it's a whey protein isolate with a casein protein added to it. So I don't know, it's a bit of a confusing product in that sense. Like, I'd probably say, what would I recommend to get the carbohydrates? I'd say have a proper casein drink and eat a banana with it, would be my suggestion, or have some blueberries, or mix it in with a frozen banana, blend it up, and you have sort of a frozen mousse. That's what I'd probably go for over that. Just, there's a lot of sugar in that product, and I don't necessarily think in the long run it's required. It could be the classic case of a supplement that's sabotaging your diet. So anyway, see what you think. Okay. Well, if no one's got any other questions, we'll say sayonara and log off. And it's weekend. Well, fast approaching the weekend here, so